All right, so let us continue our discussion regarding the existence of God. Quickly recap, we started with the principle of sufficient reason, looking into the existence of things. We proved that there must be a set of necessary beings. We looked into that set and asked whether that set can be different from what it is and requires an explanation or not. And we said we're going to have two alternatives. Either we keep saying yes to that question forever, that will be an infinite regress, or we will say no at some point, which would collapse into this one necessary being as the ultimate explanation. And the other alternative was this infinite explanation. Also note that on the side of infinite explanation, even though we started with the total set of necessary beings, we could have started from any subset of it and do the same reasoning and go forever again, or collapse into the ultimate explanation. So today I want to look more closely into these two alternatives, into more details what they mean, but mostly I will focus on the ultimate explanation, and it has more content to be discovered. This side, not much can be said, only just to clarify it a little bit more, exactly what we mean by that. And I believe that will lay the foundation for next videos to go into details of this ultimate explanation. I would put aside the infinite one. I will keep it alive, but I will just put it aside because there are much more interesting contents here, and then I will look into those properties later on. All right, so let's look at this infinite explanation alternative. So that's when we have this set of necessary beings, we look at it, and then we start asking questions. Can this thing be different from what it is, or any subset of it? And if the answer is yes, okay, we need an explanation, and that keeps going on forever. What this basically means is, in this alternative, there is nothing within this set, no part of it, that cannot not be different from what it is. That does not need an explanation. So on this alternative, every part of that set of necessary beings can be different from what it is, and requires something to activate it in that set, in that specific configuration. It requires that sort of explanation. Also note that we can include the contingent things also within this set of necessary beings. Let's add the contingent. It won't be the set of necessary beings, but let's just say that we extend this set to include the contingent things too. Now this alternative looks more natural, because now what we're talking about is basically the set of existence, everything that exists, right? There was a set of necessary beings, now we're added all the contingent things. This infinite explanation alternative basically says within this new set, it has this interpretation that within this world that we're living in and we're experiencing, there is nothing that cannot be different from what it is. I'm thinking, did I the first time, did I say cannot not be different? There is nothing that cannot be different. I don't know how that negativity goes, but anyway, you know what I mean. Like everything that you look at, every part, no matter how deep you go within these particles, whatever you want to go into, everything you look at, it can be different from what it is, and it requires an explanation by the principle of sufficient reason. So that's the world that we will live in if we take that path, the infinite explanation. Everything has an explanation. Everything is being activated into what it is from something else. And that's why, again, that kind of picture that we come down to this, like, these fundamental simples, particles, and that's the end of it. That's not true. That's not an option here. You either have to go forever, everything, you can ask this question, why is it the way that it is? And it has an answer. It has to have an answer pointing to something else. What about that? Can it be yes to something else forever? And that's why you can see that it's not a very attractive alternative for me, because of this kind of infinite going forever, everything explained by something else, by something else, by something else. And that's not very attractive. And the other reason that it's a little bit annoying for me is that in this viewpoint, what does it even mean to explain something? What is explanation? Because if you think about it, this is the same thing that usually comes up with other words like meaning or concepts. Like what is a concept? What does a concept mean? So like when we have a concept, that's like this thing that has meaning, but gives meaning to other things, to other words. Like you have one word, you don't know what it means, and you define that based on some other words. Okay, where do those words get their meaning from? They get from some other words. And you keep going on forever. But the point is, can we go on forever? Shouldn't we come to a point where we have meaning, like something that gives meaning to other things, but itself does not receive meaning from something else? Now, I'm not trying to argue for that. I'm just saying that it gets close to that space. Is something that you can read, for example, in the book of Mortimer Adler on the difference of man and the difference it makes. When he wants to argue for why human beings are different from other animals, he goes into this language things, talking about words and meaning and concepts. And there he comes up with this thing that in the end, there must be things that are meaning, They don't have meaning. They are meaning. Other words have them, and that's why they gain meaning. So in the same form, I'm thinking about explanation. Like in this world that we have, we can go forever, right? If we have something, if we expect to have something as explanation, what does that mean? What is that? And to me, an explanation would be something similar to that meaning that words borrow. It would be something that gives explanation, whatever that means, whatever we mean by that, explanation to other things. But it itself does not have an explanation because it is explanation. You see, I'm talking kind of abstract Platonic way, like talking about the explanation itself. That's basically gets you have different instances of this explanation when we, for example, explain why is it raining, or why do we have that color for that specific fruit, for example. What is it that gets that it's realized when we talk about explanation of that specific event? We can think about this explanation like in this abstract form, and then ask like, what is that? Like if we believe that we have explanation, then there should be something that doesn't have explanation but is explanation. And if we do have such a thing, then that thing is something that would not have an explanation. It wouldn't, and by the principle of sufficient reason, it shouldn't be different. It cannot be different from what it is. But the point is that in this infinite explanation alternative, everywhere that we look, everything in this universe has an explanation. We cannot come anywhere in this point, nowhere in this universe, that you stop saying no. Because remember, if you say no anywhere, we go back to ultimate explanation. So there's nothing basically that is explanation in this world because everything has an explanation. And in that sense, I wonder whether this infinite explanation alternative basically reduces to no explanation alternative. Like, it's like living in a world where every word is defined by some other word. And this goes on forever. Like, there is no, like, for us, sometimes when we talk about the color gets its meaning from our immediate experience. And that's like the rock bottom of that chain. But imagine that we were living in a world where every word would just gets its meaning from some other word. And there would be no point of contact anywhere between those words and something beyond them to, impart meaning to one of those words. And then we say, okay, what does that mean? What is water? Is this molecules of this? What is that? Is the atom of this? What is that? Is the electron proton? What is that? And it just keep going on forever. And you will never come to anything other than a word that itself gains its meaning from other words. I guess if you're living in such a world, then we would start questioning the whole meaning of the word meaning. Like, what does that even mean? Like, that word has a meaning. Does it? Where is it? Like, each word is just explained by another word, and another word. It just seems like these empty shells that are explained by other empty shells, explained by other empty shells, that they're never filled in by anything. Anyway, as I said, I don't think that these arguments are like knockdown for this alternative. I'm just trying to explain to you why I'm a little bit inclined toward the ultimate explanation, because, on this alternative, it's a little bit weird for me. But of course, appealing to intuition, this is not a good argument. So that's why I'm keeping this infinite alternative alive. But beside that, there's not much more to talk about it, basically. That's basically the end of the conversation. Like, you have this infinite, you keep going on forever. So I'm just going to put that aside, keep it alive, but maybe we can return to it later on. But let's now focus on the ultimate explanation alternative. On this alternative, we have this one necessary being, this one thing that's absolutely necessary. And by definition, it cannot be different from what it is. So I'm just trying to think about this a little bit, just to make it more clear in the same sense that we did for the infinite explanation. First, notice that this whole concept of the set of necessary being starts to lose meaning in this context. Why? Because the oneness that we're talking about here, then when we say that the necessary being is one, we prove that it's impossible to be more than one. Which means that this oneness is not like a regular oneness. Like, we can have, let's say, within the species of that specific bird, we can have one bird remaining. Or within that genus of that family of animals, we can have this one species remaining. That oneness is different from this one. It's not like that we could have multiple necessary beings, but now it turns out, as it happened in this world, there's only one. That's not what we showed. We showed that it's logically impossible to be more than one. So this oneness is not just that it happened to be one. Like, we could have had more. They died out and there's only one remaining. It's impossible. Like, this oneness is like a very strong one. It's like a transcendental one. It's impossible for it to be other than one. Which would make the whole set of necessary being meaningless, because even if you think about it, when we talk about the set of necessary beings, we say, okay, even in our thought, we say, okay, this thing that's necessary, and then we put it within this curly brackets, and then we define this set as necessary. Like, that set, that family that we embed this necessary being within it, that cannot be something independent of that thing. You know, it can't be something different from that member. Why? Because if it were different, if we embed this necessary being within a larger family, that family is also would have to be a necessary thing, right? Because it's the larger family of this necessary being. So that family also is necessary. But we just talked about it, that this oneness is kind of absolute. It's impossible for this one thing to be two, you know? But if you embed this within this larger family, it seems that family also gets this position of being necessary, which, as we assumed, is going to be different. Like, you know, that genus would be different from that species within it. And then we would have like two necessary beings, you know? And then how to differentiate between them? What is the differentia that you get from genus to species when you know that this species cannot be different from what it is? But that doesn't make sense, because if this necessary being is within this genus, you must be able to differentiate it with the differentia. So the whole concept of this species, this thing being in a genus, loses its meaning. And so I guess we cannot embed this in any larger family. We have the same, I'm not sure, it's not the same argument, but St. Thomas also has a similar thing, that God is not in a genus. If he wanted to be in a genus, it would have been in the genus of being, but being cannot be a genus, as Aristotle explains. So it basically it cannot be in a genus. But that's not the way that I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it in this sense, that it's so absolute, this oneness of this necessary being, that we cannot embed it. It has this kind of perfect connotation, the highest point, because if you embed it in something else, that thing would at least have to be necessary, and then that absolute oneness gets destroyed. All right, so this ultimate explanation has this kind of a weird position, that is this thing that you cannot embed it in a larger family, which basically means you can't really know it, you know? You can't really define it. Because that's how we define it. We embed things in a larger family, and then we say, okay, this is within this genus, and then we use a differential to define the species. We say a triangle, for example, is this geometric shape that has, for example, this specific property. But if we cannot embed this in a genus, then we can't really define it, you know, because we can't say what it is. We can we can't really say what it is. The only thing that we can say is these propositions that we're getting at, like that it cannot be different from what it is. We know that it exists, and it cannot be different from what it is, and it's not in a genus. Like when I put these things together, like trying to come up with we can't come up with a definition, but like what can we say about this thing? The only thing that we can say, beside the fact that it can't be different from what it is that it exists. But it doesn't exist, again, in a form that, like, you have this being existing, and then this thing is a being, is a thing that exists, you know? And I understand that the arguments here are kind of, they become blurry. They're not as sharp as what we did up to this point. But I guess it's just because we're getting so close to the edge of talking about the concepts that are, we're getting into the existence itself, and the lines get blurry. Like how to define these things. What do they even mean at that point? And I'm not a philosopher. I'm not strong enough in terminology to be able to find my way through through this fog. And so I'm trying to make, basically I'm just looking at these different pieces, trying to see how can I put them together, how can I make sense of this thing. Because notice that we proved that this thing exists, and it's a weird thing. Like, it's something that can't be different. It's impossible for it to be different. There's no possibility for it. There's no potentiality for it. It's purely what it is. It's pure act. And the only way that I can make sense of all of this is to say that the thing that we're talking about is not a being. It's being itself. It's not, we're not talking about a name of a being within the existing world. It's the act of being itself. It's the existence itself that we're talking about. Because then we might be able to not make sense completely, but at least get better hints at what we mean when we say that it cannot be different from what it is. Because in the material world, when we're talking about these things, we say, okay, that this thing cannot be different from what it is. We get this sense of being static, like this something is just frozen, fixed. It can't move. But that's not the case. That doesn't have to be the case. It doesn't have to be this kind of static thing. Because after when we move forward, we can see that this thing cannot really be a static and do all these things, because a static thing, then what can it do, But I mean, I will get into more details regarding that, but I'm just trying to look at this thing. What does that mean? Like, that it cannot be different from what it is. And at the same time, be the ultimate explanation. Be the thing that's causing everything to exist. Causing them to be the way that they are, ultimately. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult. But if I go into that, like the act of being, then I can get a better sense out of this. That it cannot be different from what it is, in the sense that it's so rich, it's so active, it's so much actualized, that there's just not more to be done. It has actualized, not in the sense that something has happened, but I'm just saying, in using these words, that it's as if it has actualized everything that could, in principle, be actualized. And being, the verb, the act of being, gets much closer. It's a much better option to this form of understanding than saying a being. Yeah, okay, so it's a little bit difficult to think about this thing. It's a weird thing. Like, even when we're talking about the set of necessary beings, already said that it's already weird. Like, we have these things that are impossible not to be. That's strange. But now we have this one thing that's impossible for it not to be. and is the ultimate explanation, is the thing that's keeping everything in existence. Because remember, if you look, everything that I'm saying, it might sound that it's out of blue, but if you go through the arguments, you will see that how we came to this ultimate explanation, and then you see the effects that it has, because we started from observation. So my glass is on this specific position. It exists and on that specific position because it's being kept right now in existence the way that it is by this ultimate explanation. Right now, it's we have to realize that it's a constant feed of existence. It's a constant act happening right now, holding us up in existence in this specific position, in this specific configuration right now. Ultimately, it might not be directly doing that, but notice that these things can be built on top of each other. But in the end, ultimately, everything must rest on this ground of being, of this existence, the act of being. So I guess that's the best way that I can make sense of it. So as I said, I realize that from now on, things are a little bit blurry, and I wish it could have been as clear, but it can't. At least I can't make it that clear. But I hope that the way that I would probably argue, like someone might say, okay, yeah, but up to this point, like I could have said that no, it's just this I don't know, infinite static thing, you know, like this platonic one, you know, like it doesn't change, it's just there as like this kind of entity, this abstract platonic one somewhere, you know, and okay, causing us, but just that's it, you know. Why do we have to make it so alive? Why do we have to make it the existence and try to make it more interesting than it is, right? That's basically what I'm doing right now, because someone might come to this point and say, okay, this thing cannot be different from what it is, so it's dead. Like, okay, that's a little bit stretch, like how to explain that a dead thing can hold things up, but still it might be able to do it. As I said, like, it might be something completely outside our field of experience, and yeah, it might be. But the way that I will try, and I can't really bring up arguments to support that completely, the way that I would argue for this position is basically saying that, hey, let's keep going on. Let's just keep going, and then check the explanatory power of the model that we will get if we assume that this thing is actually more interesting, you know. So by basically assuming that this thing worth going into it, that we should actually investigate it. That's actually I did it for myself, and I went forward, and then I thought about it, and then I saw that that model actually has a very interesting power of explanation. And the more I used that model, the more confident I became that that model is actually correct. So that would be the way that I would argue that this thing, we already know that it's up to a point is pretty logical, that it cannot be different from what it is. But then we start have to make it a little bit looser. So that would be the argument. I will try to make a case. We will try to look at it as if it is interesting, as if it's worth looking into it, and then based on that, create a model. Try to understand things. Try to explain things, because after all, it's the ultimate explanation. So we should be able to use it to explain things. We will try doing those things, and then we will see if it's interesting enough to keep the model as it is. Yeah, that's how I was convinced that this thing is actually much more interesting than just a dead thing, out there. But that's yet to be seen. So yeah, just to make sure to stay around and see the next videos. See you.